I was already joking this morning that I have always in my life been attracted to the most labor-intensive art forms possible. And in fact, professionally, I've had a few different career changes, but I used to work in the animation industry when we still drew things by hand. That was very labor-intensive. But that experience of working with a lot of commercial illustrators, because I worked in creating animated TV commercials. And so we were constantly hiring different commercial artists who worked in different styles to kind of follow their style for a TV commercial. So I fell in love and learned a lot about all different kinds of art materials, and then the idea of movement. So I spent my first part of my career as a fine artist doing watercolors. So I just included an example. I have, just a really brief PowerPoint. This was an example of my watercolor work where I captured movement, very labor-intensive technique. What I did, which is the point I'm going to make of going from watercolors to paper cut, is I would cover the watercolor paper with a stencil material called frisket, and then with an X-Acto knife, very delicately, so I didn't cut through the watercolor paper, I would pull off pieces of that and make a stencil so that I could airbrush in the backgrounds. So all of the background, so I could get a kind of gradation. And at that point, at some point, I fell in love with paper cuts because I had this epiphany that it is in so many cultures around the world. In my own Judaic Eastern European background, in China, Japan, Mexico, I'll show you some examples. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna just try seeing how I like paper cutting just for the pure interest in it. And I just took some of the imagery that I had even done in watercolor and cut through the paper and did my first paper cut, and that evolved into the work that I'm doing now. Okay, so that watercolor koi, this is my first paper cut koi. And also the idea, besides the fact I love to travel, so that has incorporated all the different kind of interest in paper cutting. I love seeing what folk art is done in different places. This medium has allowed me, and I'll mention this as we go through, every aspect of my life has become incorporated into my paper cuts. I do have a big koi pond in my backyard, so this was my translation into that. Okay, I always have been attracted to Japanese woodblock prints. So when I think about these paper cuts, I also think of them also in terms of printmaking. And I have brought in two examples so you can get a better idea of my paper cuts. So in woodblock prints, a lot of times they'll have an outside border, and the top layer, they call the key block, ties it all together. So I actually start with this top layer, and it ties all the pieces together. And again, also the idea of being interested in the koi. Okay, so this is again one of my earlier paper cuts where the layering of paper, even this detail here that it's transparent and trying to capture the movement. So at first I was doing these where I had a little bit more limited palette than I'm working with right now. Okay, here's some more examples. This one, I actually brought in the original, so I'll talk a little bit more about this one. Okay, one thing about the history of paper cutting is that a lot of them are symmetrical and also have very strong vertical and horizontal lines, because you're creating a piece of lace, and that's what keeps it all together. And for me also, because these do take a lot of time, there for me always has to be an element of surprise, so that I am, while I'm working, delighting myself with what is happening instead of being bored. So in the symmetrical ones, and we're going to do that today, is make a small symmetrical paper cut. When I work on a piece and it's actually folded in half and I unfold it, there's some shapes that happen that I did not plan. So that moment of surprise to myself is what kind of drives me to complete one step, I open it up and I go, oh my God, that's amazing. So, you know, things like, so for each of these, I actually only did half the drawing, and I cut through 2 halves and opened it up, and all of these shapes that are inside just magically appear, and then I play off of them. So, you know, I didn't plan some of this stuff down the middle, so that's actually fun. So we'll talk a little more about that. Okay, the other thing is that in my paper cuts, I often try to capture the whole like essence of something. So a lot of them are based on realistic places, again, that I love to travel, so not only around the world, but locally going to national parks. So this was inspired by Joshua Tree. But I'm not thinking of one place. So I'm not basing these on like a photograph. I'm kind of, in my mind, collaging together all of the things that I like about a place and then putting them all together. So historically, a lot of paper cutting was used to create a lot of family trees. So that idea of hierarchy. So I like my paper cuts to reference the history of paper cutting. So I think of a lot of these as being like family trees, like the hierarchy of the species that are in a place. So that's why there's, again, the idea of these horizontal lines and kind of layering of the different elements I might find in a place. Going the wrong way. So again, this is from that same series where I was thinking of like the essence of a tropical jungle that I visited. And again, you know, the different species, even in this case, the fact that some of the species are more elevated. Some are high up in the trees and some are low down in the ground or the water. And again, you know, these shapes that happen in the middle because they're symmetrical. And people always ask me what my references are, what artists I'm attracted to, and actually I, again, like that I am reinforced in continuing to do paper cutting because of the different people that I come across in my journey. So it isn't that they're the typical people, and I get excited by how everything seems to kind of like spontaneously come together. Like, why did I discover this artist? Whoa, I needed to know that this woman, Frances Gerhardt, there was a show of her work, little recognized artist. It was at the Pasadena, in Pasadena, the California Museum. That's not what it's called, I'm forgetting its name. She did colored woodblock prints of different scenes in California. She also was a teacher, and I said I was an animator, and then I moved on to teaching art in a private school in West LA. But I often look at plein air painters and a person like Frances Gerhardt to get inspiration of color. And I think that the choice of color, and we'll talk about that today, is probably the most personal aspect of it. And then I think for me, kind of one of the elements that makes my work stand out from other paper cutters, the use of color.
Are you using paint still for your colors or just the paper?
It's only the color paper that I find. Okay, again, this is the same kind of landscape of those other ones, but I actually was an artist in residence this last summer in Denali National Park. So this was the piece that kind of captured my whole experience there. The other element, I've kind of gone through a phase of kind of relating my work to the arts and crafts movement or Art Nouveau. Again, because it has to do with that feeling of it being like a print or a woodblock print. So this one has a little bit more of some of the elements from that period. And this one too as well. Maybe just some of the shapes, the branches, I don't know exactly, but. And again, this journey led me across another amazing woman artist, Margaret Armstrong, who was known for her book design covers. And when she actually started not getting work anymore because the way they made book covers kind of evolved, she didn't have as much work. She was very interested in botany, and she actually went with some very adventurous women, and they were the first white women who reached the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and she actually came up with a field guide to the flowers. So she's just a person I admire, but again, her work, it has that, it's in the 20s, so from that period, and they're also symmetrical. And then her use of the stylized flowers. So if I do use photographs in my work, and I reference real things a lot by now we don't have to photograph things anymore, we can just Google them. But I'll look at an image of something real that I want to incorporate and then stylize it. So she has stylized all those flowers. Okay, and the other thing that is very liberating, and personally, I have loved traveling in India, and I admire Indian miniatures so much, but the freedom I use in my work that the Indian miniatures I reference is that there is no perspective in my work. So although I have realistic things, I don't have them in the appropriate size relationship to each other. So when I have like the hierarchy of species in my work, they're not relative to each other, and I just always really love that about Indian miniature paintings, that again, within the composition, what is at the top is the same size, so there's not the same depth of field that, and they just include everything that's in the scene all in one. Okay, so just really quickly about paper cutting itself, just to show you how it's in every culture. So in Eastern Europe, the sad thing about looking into the history of paper cutting is many of these things were not made to last. They were made for holidays to celebrate events in family life. So especially Judaic paper cuts, there are very few of them, historical ones, that exist. They were just made of simple materials. Paper that lasts, but not unless it's really taken care of. So. And in Japanese paper cutting, two kinds really. One is just cutting through the paper, but then also they also have a form where it incorporates origami and cutting together. So that's like the two kinds that you can see in Japan. Chinese paper cutting, and really they trace paper cutting back to before the invention of paper. And there are even contemporary artists now who are using the technique that they know they used before paper, was cutting into anything that was thin, like leaves. So, and then the imagery. And what I also wanted to point out about this is a lot of Chinese and Japanese paper cut is out of red paper. So I think it's also important to look at the symbols in your own life that are important and incorporate that into your art, and also the colors that resonate with you. So in Japanese and Chinese paper cuts, red is for good luck. And also, there is a kind of folk tale about that there was some demon that was bothering a town, and there was a small child who was wearing a red little jacket, and so the demon got scared by that child's jacket, and that was another reason why they keep using red. And then the idea of the fish as also being a symbol of good luck. The fact that the koi is a very determined species, it can actually swim upstream and go against adversity. So I think those are important to just catalog what imagery is important to you and incorporate that into your artwork. And papel picado, the Mexican art that we see so much as Day of the Dead has become so much huger in Los Angeles. In different cultures, they create paper cuts out of using different tools. So there, they actually stack up tissue paper and use a chisel hammer. So the chisel actually is cutting through the stack of them. Whereas I'll show you in Europe, Poland, and in Germany, places like that, they use very small scissors. So the Polish paper cut, and again, this you know, when you talk about like the history of paper cutting, they think that because of the cold, they covered their windows with leather, and then somebody thought about cutting a design into it. So a lot of Polish are still in the eastern part of the United States. They use shears, sheep shears, things you think, oh my God, that's a kind of a crude instrument to do such delicate work, but they do. And also this has the multicolored, but it's layers of paper that they glue together. And this is typical Swiss and German is, I never know if I'm saying this right, Sharon Schnitz type. And the paper cutting that is done with scissors. And what to me also is very exciting is you have the range of folk art to contemporary art and everything in between. So Kara Walker does paper cutouts. The street artist Swoon, there actually is a fantastic show right now at Shepherd Ferry's gallery in Echo Park called Papercuts, and it's 5 or 6 paper cut artists, including this artist Swoon, who actually does paper cuts and then sticks them onto the side of buildings. And then, you know, this is actually an installation at the New Orleans Museum of Art. So paper cutting crosses so many cultures and so many different approaches to doing art. Actually, this artist is a very famous paper cutter, and I just thought maybe those of you who are taking notes, if you want to note her name, she does everything from fashion to more traditional paper cuts, and also she is given, if any of you love TED Talks, I love TED Talks.
Yeah.
She does a fantastic TED Talks, and also her website is a resource of a million paper cutters and also resource for materials. So Beatrice Caron. Okay, and also just in terms of imagery, I've actually done paper cuts about folk tales. So my version of Goldilocks, and this is a Russian tale of snow child about a couple who can't have a child, and so they make it out of snow. So again, it's just important to think of the imagery. And this artist, Ilse Moore, is a Cuban artist. She cuts it, but she also molds it over like little curved surfaces so that she gets things to stand up. This paper cut artist lives in Florida. I just wanted to show, I included how she works from the back, but she works with scissors. There's a close-up of her working. But they're more like little clippers. This is a Japanese, contemporary Japanese artist who also does her work with scissors. Really, it is unbelievable that she can actually cut everything away and leave a line as thin as that. And I'll just end with one last piece of mine.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because I also love running. So this is my tribute to Santa Monica, where I run, and a little bit more urban feel.